musical journey and how did you get to where you are today? And if you want to talk about the other stuff you do, I think that kind of relates.
24 years old. I live in Brooklyn. I live in Bushwick in New York City. And I'm the assistant conductor of the Queer Urban Orchestra based in Manhattan. I started my musical journey in fourth grade in a very, 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 very small town in Eastern Pennsylvania. And fourth grade, I saw the French horn and I was like, what is that? And I was like, I saw other people like going to the trumpet. I saw other people going to the snare drum. I was like, I don't want to do that. Like even at a young age, I was like, I'm gonna have a better chance of being successful doing the thing that other people are not doing. So I picked the French horn, and I had a best friend, Courtney, who also just happened to pick the French horn. We became friends, and we just stuck with it all throughout high school. Ended up being the drum major my senior year, which was amazing. Also the president of our band program, and I basically like just wanted all of these things for myself when I entered there as a freshman, and I just worked really hard because that was basically my whole life. I had nothing else to look forward to at the point of my life. It was amazing for me. I found such a good community in the music program in that school, whereas I had no community elsewhere. As like a young queer person that didn't really fully know that how queer I was or even trans, anything. Like and the town was so small that the first time in my life I heard the word transgender, I was a freshman in my freshman English class in college. And I was like, what is that? So just some more perspective of how small this town was. It was a very difficult place to grow up as. I'm still a white person, you know, I still have that privilege in that town. But I mean, as a queer person in that space, it was brutal. But the one thing that helped me get through all of that, of course, was music. And I knew the only way for me to get out of that town was to go to college. And the only way for me to go to college, because my mom is broke. My parents have been divorced since I was 5, and both of them are broke. Like, they have no money. My mom was, you know, trying to raise both my sister and I at some point, same with my dad. So I knew the only way for me to go to college was that I would have to get a scholarship. And I was smart. I got A's, B's, but I wasn't top of my class to the point I was going to get an academic scholarship. So I also knew I had to pursue music like relentlessly. And luckily it was a passion of mine, so it kind of worked out. And I applied to 2 colleges. It was Ithaca College and Penn State University. I got into both. And then throughout college, I remember as soon as I got there, I was like, I'm going to be the best high school band teacher in the world. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in the public school system. And even after like a year, I'm coming into my skin more as a trans non-binary individual and my queerness sexually. And I'm just meeting more people. I've met some people that are in the public school system as queer people. And I'm just realizing, like, I quickly realized it's just not possible for me to have a healthy life working in the public school system as a queer trans person. Like, it's not a happy life. The people that I do know, even the cis gay people that I know, have to keep their lives completely private, and they can't bring their partners in their spaces of work, and they don't have the same agency and autonomy with their personal life and their work life. And I was like, this is miserable. Like, I don't want to do this. But for me, I was able to find other pathways to navigate through life. But yeah, I mean, that just comes to show that, like, you don't have the same agency as a trans person in any of these spaces. Like, they don't give a shit about you. And it's not just like the institutions. A lot of it is institution. Well, I'll touch on that a little bit more. So I quickly realized I was like, okay, this is not for me. So I was like, you know what? I want to be a professional conductor. Like, I want to conduct. I immediately, freshman year, I went to the conducting faculty at Penn State, and then I told them about my passion. And both of the professors, Edelstein and Professor Clocky, offered to give me like free conducting lessons, like on their own time, which was just lovely and helped me out so much. And so I'm like, I want to be I was only involved in band, but I was like, wait, the only place to be a professional band conductor is in academia. And I was like, ooh, that's not going to work for me. So I need to like work with professional orchestra. Great. Because that'll just be the most accepting environment ever, as I thought. And because it's so funny in classical music, because you're like, oh, everybody's queer here. This is fine. We can be ourselves, but it's really quite, I mean, yes, a lot of people are queer, but it's really quite the opposite in terms of safety and expectations regarding that. Oh, so then I, was like, okay, I'm going to be a professional orchestra conductor, and the next step would be to go to grad school, because yes, I was studying orchestra conducting the whole 4 years of my undergrad. I was conducting the Miami Music Festival. I was conducting all of my summers in between. I was doing other things just to kind of build my experience and my resume up. And I get to the end of my 4 years, and it's time for me to apply for grad school. So I applied to, it was like 6 or 7 different grad schools across the country. Half of them forced me to identify within the gender binary. I identify non-binary, great, but they would force me to identify as a man. So the application process is you submit an application. Do they like your application, your your application, great. Then they'll ask you for pre-screen materials, and then you get invited for a live audition. Every single application that I was forced to identify as a man I got through every single round of the audition process, and I made it to the final round in real life. I mean, every single one would allow me to identify as trans. That would have an option on the application. I would not make it past the application. It's great. It's right, the double-edged sword of, yes, we get to have identifiers on applications, but they're a lot of the time just being used to select people. It's just used to oppress and marginalize, gatekeep. So it's like, yes, I can identify as trans, but as soon as someone sees that I'm trans and they don't want to work with a trans person, they're not going to have a trans person because they see it. So it's just like, oh, it's not as good as we think it is in practice. So I go to the live auditions, I go to the final round, and I tell these people, hi, so my pronouns are they, them, I'm non-binary. Every single person, I could just see something in their eyes change. And I just knew that they weren't okay with it. Because also I was at an early part of my trans journey where I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to be becoming more comfortable in my body. So I need to tell these people. So basically did not get into any of those schools. And when I would ask for feedback, I would be ghosted, or several people said the same thing to me. They said, oh yeah, I think you just need more experience in this field, in this world. Which was basically just telling me, like, go back in the closet. Like I don't know, I didn't know how to take that. So then I go back to Edelstein and I'm heartbroken, embarrassed. And he's like, okay, well, we'll make a 1-year graduate program for you, and then we'll work on this, and then we'll do it again next year. I'm like, great. The year goes by, I do 8 different schools. The same exact thing happens. When I'm forced to identify as a man, I get through to the final round. When I am allowed to identify as trans, I am rejected on site. So after the whole experience again, I'm just like, I'm back in Edelstein's office, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he is just one of the best people of my life that I've ever met and worked with in the classical music field. And he's like, listen, like, I don't think these institutions are built and structured for people like you. And I feel like if you want to go get work, and if you want to work in this field, you have to go to a city where you can be yourself and accept yourself. And like literally verbatim said, I hope one day you can conduct an orchestra full of queer and trans people. And I was like, bet, like I would love that. Like, and just like so beautiful to hear from a straight cis man who's just a really great, fierce ally. And that was in May or April. And then, June comes around, I'm thinking about moving to New York City, and the Queer Urban Orchestra, which is like a professional orchestra that's made of all LGBTQIA people, had an opening for their artistic director position. And I have no experience being an artistic director, but I was like, you know what? I'm queer, and this sounds like a dream job. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna shoot my shot. And it came down between me and someone who is a professor at the Manhattan School of Music, and obviously they chose him. They really loved you and just were very comfortable with you leading rehearsal, and we would like to offer you a position as the assistant conductor. And so that's how I got my job, working for the assistant for the Queer Urban Orchestra. But both times I've, conducted in gowns, and it's been a very beautiful experience, particularly because even with, cis women in this field, cis straight women in this field as conductors, they're always, from what I see, they're always in suits, or they're always in masculine presenting clothing, because people in classical music and that are mostly men don't respect femininity. Can't I be in a dress, feel comfortable, look great, and do my job? So it's just like I'm trying to bring attention to that as well and break all of that stuff down. But that's how I got here. And also throughout this whole process, I've been doing makeup art, which is weird and unexpected because when I was really getting pushed away from my field of class, dove and found refuge in the craft of makeup and doing makeup as a transformative process. And it's been helping me sustain myself a lot in this city. I'm will be announcing it soon, but I also just got signed to one of the largest talent agencies in the country.
So you kind of talked about this a little bit, but why music and what does music mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't have a choice when I was little. Like I just needed something to express myself. Like I found a CD one day and it was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and I would just dream of all of these storylines going to the music, and I would wave my arms around like I knew what I was doing. And from the jump, it was just a place for me to relentlessly express myself. And you know, as a queer and trans person, that has been invaluable to my survival on this planet. And because of that, my bond with music is very, very strong, and I will have it for the rest of my life.
Why is diversity important in music education and music in general?
It is crucial. It is literally crucial. If we can't even have diversity in the arts, what are we doing? I mean, literally, arts comes from marginalized communities. Like, I mean, all major form and movements of art come from some form of like oppression, or I mean, if you look at America, like jazz, soul, pop, country, all of this comes from our Black communities that were faced with the African diaspora, like literally being uprooted from their country and being enslaved here for hundreds of years. And they literally have created what we consider music today, like pop music. All of our music is so heavily influenced by, you know, our Black citizens, but they don't have equity in these spaces as they should. I mean, if we want to talk about a musical organization being diverse, like, okay, let's look at the board. And 9.99 times out of 10, it's all white, cis, straight people. Even some organizations that, you know, promote being diverse, they're really, really not. I mean, racially, with gender, trans people, with sexuality. And it's not something that you can just, the change needs to be, change with diversity needs to be, it needs to come from the institution, right? So you can't just like have people up from top looking down below and be like, okay, we need to bring in more diversity. No, you literally need to have diverse people in charge, in positions, making decisions, having that say, versus you just have, you know, the same white cis straight people being like, oh, we'll bring in more diversity. No, that's tokenism. Like literally give diverse people decision making spots, period. But it's so crucial, and it's really obscene how little it is happening. If we are ever in a position to make a difference, we need to, but I feel like a lot of people just like rely on someone else doing it, or it will happen, and it won't. It literally won't. Historically, it hasn't.
And I think the root of it is like this, like schooling and education. Like if you're teaching kids the diverse people and you're showing them that that is a possibility from their first grade music class, like those are the people with, I think, the biggest megaphones, even because they're seeing the most kids.
And also like using your megaphone to give it to other people that normally don't have it. Like, you know, even just like bringing in more Black musicians, like to talk about their own craft, bringing in queer people, like it's just so important. And also it's like, how are we going to, you know, I mean, whitewash music history and also like wash it of any queer history? Like, I mean, literally, how the hell am I learning about Tchaikovsky at Penn State University and no one's talking about his sexuality when it is such an influential part of his entire existence and his whole craft? It is literally a result of white supremacy, and they literally still enforce and it's an institution of white supremacy. Like, we do not learn about Black music. We do not learn about Hispanic music. We are only taught Western European music history, its importance, it being the number one thing, to just enforce ideas of white supremacy. And it's really discouraging, because why are we selecting such a specific part of history to talk about? And I mean, and yes, there have been many Black classical musicians. There have been many queer classical musicians, but we just very selectively cherry pick what stories to tell and teach. And it's very discouraging. It's very discouraging.
As a jazz, I mean, my last degree was a jazz degree, and I love
Yes.
attending. We spent one day in all of our music history classes. Do you remember that? We had a jazz day.
Mm-hmm.
We had a
I
jazz
remember one of our fellow students, Mac, even brought it up at one point and was like, why aren't we talking about like more Black musicians? And some of the people were like, oh, well, that's not real music. This is, and it's like, you're brainwashed. Shut up. Like, that's screwed. That's literally racist. Like, I mean, but also we've been brainwashed to believe that. So it's just like, yeah, you get one day to learn about jazz music when it's literally, but we learn about Charles Ives including jazz notions in his music. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, it's very interesting. Our university is not unique. Is not unique. It is, this happens absolutely everywhere.
Why is it important for young musicians to see an array of composers programmed?
I mean, right, because people just need to see themselves represented in music. And when you're talking about people, you're talking about a diverse group of people. Like, so you need to make sure all of your students see that they can, have access to this field. If you're only showing men composers, like, well, that you're literally telling your female students and non-binary students that they just don't have a shot. Like, it's just so important. It's the baseline of like why we need representation. In academia, at least, everything is so selective in how it's chosen, and it's very intentional. A diverse group of musicians working in the field, if you yourself don't know who is currently working in the field, you know what I mean? If you only work with white people, what you're that's who you're going to, and you're white and you see yourself constantly, affirmed in these spaces, of course you're not ever going to even think of the need to help your Black students, to help your female students, help your non-binary students, your trans students, because you don't encounter those issues ever in your life.
If you could tell educators in the US to change or add one thing to the music education curricula having to do with diversity, what would it be?
I mean, a lot. Like, quite literally a lot. Just a larger focus on Black music, like literally everything. I mean, all of our music in like the last like 150 years, every genre that has formed has been influenced heavily by Black people and our Black citizens, our Black musicians, and they have the far least equity in this space. Classical music, how many Black conductors do you know? How many Black conductors are conducting professional orchestras? And when you do see them, most of them are Black men. So Black women, how many Black trans people? It's the same thing. And that needs to start institutionally. It needs to start from a point of education, knowing that when we are raising these children, that we are telling them and we're showing them, you can do this. Look at your ancestors. They literally created everything that we have. Meanwhile, these students are told that, actually these old white dead people, that colonized this nation, actually did everything that's important and everything you need to know, that, and this is really good, and this is professional, and this is classical, and everything else just isn't. It's just not. It's not as good. But when we're able to tell people from a young age, like, no, like, you come from a line of people that literally invented all of this and have revolutionized music history, and we can empower them from a young age, then that's how we can get to more Black female conductors. But I mean, hopefully, but I do think it starts with education, and it starts with diversifying curriculums. And, the same for women in the field, the same for trans people in the field. But yeah, like, our most marginalized members are literally are still Black people. And it's just like, these institutions are segregated. Like, look into a professional symphony and count how many Black people are in it, and it's like there's no equity in the space still, and it's because of the access to education is still heavily gatekept. So it's like, okay, we don't have people in the job, so how do they get to the job? Academia, same stuff. And then you look at high school, at middle school, and that education as well. And it's, yeah, I really do think it starts with just diversifying and putting a larger emphasis on Black music in curriculums and
Yeah.
music curriculums.